All right, hello everyone, it's Silver Kyle, and today we're going to be going over all the books that I hope to read in the month of December 2024. And as per usual, I've stacked it with just way too much. And the only thing is that, as you can see, I've already started some of them, and that might help things. The problem is that I'm reading too many books, and to a degree, it's because I'm just not getting a really big reading binge of any of these because I'm not interested in them as much as I should be. They're just not flowing, they're not easy reads, and I'm struggling a little bit. And that really does eat in to my reading time that I could be putting in towards them. And I'm finding myself just reading something, and I'll be like, okay, I read a chapter, and then I'll browse on my phone. And I'll read another chapter, and then I'll browse on my phone. Or I'll look at something else, or go do something, grab a snack. And it's just wasting time. And then I get something that it's an easy read, and maybe the story in itself isn't necessarily great, but I'm just focused and able to just knock out those chapters, read those chapters. I need something like that. But let's look at what we have here. There's a few new books because I think that that'll help me read other books. And I'll kind of talk about there's a method to my madness, and I'll get to that in a second. But let's start off with something, the only manga here that I'm planning to read. I wanted to start Death Note. I did start Death Note. I read, this is Death Note Black Edition Volume 1, which is essentially Volumes 1 and 2 of Death Note. I read this, and I'm just waiting for the next, I got the rest of the Black Editions. I'm just waiting for them to arrive. So just as a placeholder, I will be continuing Death Note. I'll at least read Black Edition Volume 2, which is Volumes 3 and 4. And hopefully reading a little bit more, but we'll see how things go. But these, you can knock them out so quickly, like it's manga. It's even volumes 1 and 2 just flies by. And this was darn good. But we'll talk about that in my November reads. So, Death Note, continuing that, at least the next volume. Another new one that I want to start, it came out earlier this year, and that is the Silver Blood Promise, which is the Last Legacy book 1, I guess, from James Logan. And this is a fantasy novel where the main character, it was an heir to like a big empire or something like that. And because that he essentially is an academy dropout, and because of a duel that he lost really badly, he's a disgraced heir. So he's kind of just like this, living in the slums. He just does a lot of rigged card games. He basically says that his days consist of cheap wine, rigged card games, and wondering how he might win back the life that he threw away. But then his father dies. And so now he feels like he has a purpose because he's not able to right the wrongs that he did in his life and get forgiveness from his father, but he wants to find out what happened to him. And it basically brings him to this really big fabled city where he's going to try to find out the truth of what happened to his father. Sounds interesting to me. I love the art here. This is what I like to see. Now, you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but this helps because it gives me a sense, like when I see this, I then imagine the world based off of this one image, and I like the image, so what I see in my mind seems enticing to me. Now, it's all going to depend on how the story runs, how the author writes, how the characters link up, the verbiage that they use. If it's stuff that I can relatively follow and understand, then there's a good chance that I'll like this. But I'm feeling good about that one. The only other new book that I have in here, everything else is going to be stuff that I've started, is David Baldacci's A Calamity of Souls, which is another 2024 novel. This is a mystery thriller novel, from what I gather, and it is about a white lawyer for the first time kind of helping out a black man, or taking a black man's case where he is alleged to have brutally murdered somebody. I can't remember who it is. An elderly couple, a wealthy white couple. So some kind of lawyer thriller, and apparently there's a lot more to this than just, trying to prove that this black man's innocence. So looking forward to that. I generally like David Baldacci. I've read a lot out of all the thriller mystery novelists that I've read him the most. So I'm close to 10 books, if not more, from him now. I'm probably at over 10 now, so that's kind of cool. Now let's get into the books that have just been the bane of my existence for 6 months. Dune. I am still reading Dune. I'm maybe a little 150 pages, close to 150 pages in this. I like it, kind of, but it's not something that's really jiving with me to want to keep reading, like, chapter after chapter after chapter. You know, you get a book and you're like, okay, just one more chapter, just one more chapter, just one more chapter. A David Baldacci book, because it's easy, because it's a thriller mystery novel, like, I could just be like that all the time. The other thing too that helps is that the chapters are a lot shorter. This is a sci-fi book from 1965. It's a lot more dense. It's a lot more different than what you currently read in modern books. Probably even more, even compared to modern sci-fi. But I like the story. I'm kind of into the characters. It's just not making me want to read a crazy amount, but I want to finish it because I want to watch the movies. And Mike's from Mike's Book Reviews, I think this is his favorite book of all time. So I really want to give it a chance because I like Mike. I feel like a lot of the things that he says when I read a book that he's read, we generally agree, or I see where he's coming from. So I want to read his favorite book of all time. I'm just struggling. Now we're going to look at the other books that I'm not really struggling with. I'm just, for some reason, I'm stuck reading still. This one, The Trials of the Empire, book 3 of The Empire of the Wolf by Richard Swan. I haven't made any progress since this summer, so we're still reading this. But I do feel that once I'm done reading this next book, that'll be the next one that I kind of dive into. Other than maybe Dune. I don't know. I have no idea. I started The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne because I was in a slump with Dune, and I was like, okay, I need to dive into something that I want to read, and book 3 just came out. So I wanted to start this to maybe hopefully kind of spring me along, get me into something that will get me into book 2, and then I could read book 3 of this, and then, I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm about halfway through, a little more than halfway through right now. And I go through, because there's 3 different point of views in this fantasy novel. I love Orca. If this was just a story about Orca, I think that I would be done by now. But there's 2 other characters. What are their names? Elvra and Varg, I think. So Varg is one of them, and Elvra, I think, is the other one. Of course, that's going to Orca. Elvar. At the beginning, Varg had a more interesting story, and then Elvar was kind of boring, and Orca had the best. Orca was just like up here, Varg's like maybe down here, and Elvar is down here. And now it's kind of switched where Elvar actually has a really good story, and we've really seen a lot from her character, so I'm starting to get into her, liking her story quite a bit more. But it's the other thing too, and I know that this shouldn't affect it, but I looked at this and I thought it was going to be medieval fantasy, or, high fantasy, something like that. And it's Vikings. And for some reason, Vikings, everybody's like, oh yeah, Vikings are awesome. I've never been interested in Vikings. High fantasy setting, Dungeons and Dragons type of stuff, Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time, my jam. That is 100% me. That's what I love. Vikings, There was a bunch of guys dressed in fur coats just killing each other coming in from sailboats. That to me is all it is. There's a lot more to it. And we see a lot more with it with these characters, specifically Orca. Perfect. That makes me like Vikings. Same thing with Elvar right now. She's really interesting too. Varg is just okay. He's not bad. It's just that now he's kind of just nothing really interesting compared to the other 2 stories. But yeah, just Viking settings. Yes. I don't know why. It's very similar to a medieval fantasy type setting, right? There's still magic in this world. There's different one thing I'll say is that I think he either uses his own language or some kind of Viking language in this, like Norse language. And so it's just words that mean nothing to me. I'm trying to, I'll probably just open up a page and I'll be able to find something. Maybe not. Nope. Of course, when I'm looking, I can't find. Guafala. This person was slain on the day of Guafala. The heck is that? I don't know. So, I mean, anytime that you get like a bunch of different words, yes, it's going to be sometimes a little bit harder to follow, and eventually you see it often enough. It's just that all of these words, I just say, no, I'm not going to learn what this word is or what it means. There's a glossary at the end, and I do appreciate that. But I don't feel like learning it because it's Guafala. I'm never going to use that term again. I read something like The Wheel of Time and Aes Sedai sticks with me. I will always know what that is. Always. Like in everything. How the wheel, everything in The Wheel of Time, the words that they use, I can follow, I can remember. Maybe it's because I've read it so many times, that probably helps. But I feel like back when I started reading Wheel of Time when I was 15 years old, I was able to stick with it. So, yeah, it's the Viking setting. I don't know why the Viking setting doesn't do anything for me. It should. It's very similar to regular fantasy, but I just always had this, I have this bias that I would see what Vikings were, and it's probably from something that I've seen, where it's just a bunch of people that are essentially barbarians, not smart, not intelligent. They just they have battle lust, and they just go and kill people, rape and pillage, and I'm just like, yeah, not my kind of thing. I want a knight, I want a heroine, I want a wizard, I want that kind of setting. An archer, and then they're just badass, and the set. I think that the location. So I'm imagining it in my mind that they're in a very northern realm, and that I generally don't like as well. I want them in the woods, with flush forests, with where elves are, and then you go into a mine where a dwarf is. I like the old school Lord of the Rings Tolkien style of stories. I think that's the kind of fantasy that I lean towards. But what's interesting is that this is a lot deeper than my bias against Viking stories. And if this was just Orca, I'd be done. I'm sure of it. And last but not least, here I am talking about I love Tolkien style stories. I'm going to finish this trilogy. I'm finally going to finish this trilogy. I have to do it in December. Honestly, once I'm done Shadow of the Gods, I should jump into this. I should be reading this and something else. Maybe David Baldacci's Calamity of Souls. What I like to do is I say, okay, read 30 pages of something that you're struggling with. Just read those 30 pages. Don't look at anything else. Don't stop and look at your phone. Just focus for 30 pages, maybe 2 chapters or whatever it is. And then treat yourself with something like a mystery novel and read another 30 pages there. So then I get 60 pages of reading done in the day while reading something that I'm not really having a hard time with Tolkien. It's just that it's so deep that it takes me longer to read than almost anything else. And it's like, that was heavy. I don't know how else to explain it. Simple, easy, I can get into it. It's modern. Tolkien, heavy. Incredible. Like, out of everything that I'm reading currently, Tolkien, the way that he writes is incredible. I love the way that he writes. It's heavy, and it's hard for me to read. I think maybe the first time. I think that rereads from now on of The Lord of the Rings will be easier for me. I don't necessarily know if I'll read The Hobbit again. Not for a long time, but I want to reread Lord of the Rings like in 2 years or something like that, like the whole thing. But it's just there's so many other books that I need to read, and I'm feeling the pressure of being overwhelmed because I want to read so many fantasy novels, because I was a big reader as a teenager, like up until I was about 20 years old, and then I stopped for a really long time where I was only reading a handful of books a year. And now I'm back into it, and I'm like, there are so many books and series, long series that I need to read that I feel overwhelmed, and I feel like I need to read all of this. And I need to get to a point where I don't feel that and I just let that go. But I think I need to read a certain amount of series and be like, okay, I've read these all big series. Now I can settle down a little bit and go at my own pace and still read just potentially even more at that point. But it's the pressure. It's very strange. This is a video that I think I'm going to do another video like this about how I try to focus on reading and trying to read more and talking about this, because it's there with me, and I think a lot of other people struggle with that, with not just books but just hobbies in general. When you have time, because of how life is in 2024 and how it's such a fast-paced world that we live in now, with so many distractions, it's hard to kind of set time just to enjoy something that you love. So if you've stayed until the very end here, thank you. I mean, you've just listened to me kind of blab on things, but yeah, I think that could be a very interesting video that I do later on. So anyway, that's everything that I hope to read in the month of December. I might, because there's a lot here that I've started, and it's only another 2 things that I'm that's gonna be new, and then another volumes 2, 3, and 4 of Death Notes. So we'll see. If by chance I finish all of this, I won't. But if I do, I would continue on reading the Bloodsworn Saga, I think is what it's called. Book 2 and 3 is what I would continue reading if by chance I read all of this, because I do have some time off coming up at the end of December from work, and I do plan on doing a lot of reading then. So there you have it. Thank you all for watching. You have been bearded in. Beardage.